God, this morning we come listening for you to speak afresh into our lives, that we might know you more fully, learn how to love more fully. And so this morning we ask that all the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts would be pleasing to you. And where we depart from your Spirit, O God, may that quickly fall away. Amen. Marie Kondo. Maybe you've heard of her. Her Japanese methods of simplifying have become all the rage of late. I even heard on the radio the other day that they've coined a new verb. I've been condoing this weekend. How about you? Only a month after her Netflix show debuted in January, Goodwill of Tampa Bay reported that they had seen a 3% increase. Roughly an extra 5 million pounds of clothes and furniture and other items dropped off. Her methods might be particularly helpful for those of us who, on reaching retirement age, are overwhelmed by the sheer volume of stuff we have collected over the years and are trying to downsize. Or it might be helpful for all the rest of us who don't have the excuse of years, but are still walled in and weighed down by clutter and things that have piled up around us. She suggests that you hold each of your possessions in your hand, and if it brings you joy, you keep it. If not, you discard it. In one episode, as a couple is simplifying, the camera pans to their driveway. You see it piled high with hundreds of trash bags waiting to go to the dump or be donated. This was just the beginning. But truth be told, the vast majority of us are less concerned with discarding our stuff than with being discarded ourselves. None of us, right? None of us wants to become disposable. In fact, if you really stop and you talk with people, you find out that a lot of us carry around this fear. This fear that suddenly our lives won't matter and we'll just be discarded like the trash. It's the transgender teenager who's scared to come out to their parents, worried that all this unconditional love they've shown them their whole childhood will just go up in smoke. That they will become a statistic, one of the many homeless teens in the LGBT community, because their parents decided they didn't want them as they are. It's the woman whose health begins to decline and who stays up at night wondering if she will be tossed in a nursing home and forgotten. It's the man who notices his partner losing interest in intimacy in him, who goes to bed on the opposite side of the house from his spouse at night, overwhelmed by loneliness, and wondering if without warning, without notice, silently, slowly, he has become inconsequential to the one he loves most in this world. It's the young athlete who gets in a car accident, can no longer play her sport, and doesn't know what she has to offer to the world anymore, or why anyone would want to keep her around. It's the parent of a specially abled child who sees the light their child is in the world, but who also knows they will likely never be what society would define as a contributing member, at least not the way people expect, and starts to wonder if their child's life will matter to anyone once they're gone. It's the veteran who is so pressed down by a cloud of depression and PTSD that on some days he terrifies himself because he realizes there are some days his life doesn't matter even to himself. It's the sister of an African-American boy shot and killed while unarmed, who senses in her deepest soul that his life did not matter to the one who shot him, wasn't valuable, was disposable, because the shooter read his skin color as criminal, not as human. And now she worries if his life will matter to the justice system. None of us like to think of ourselves or our loved ones as tossed in a bag and set to the curb by our family or friends, by our community or our public officials, by our church, or even by our own selves, and perhaps worst, by God. People come to Jesus with similar concerns one day. Now, they don't mention hell, but I imagine it was on their minds. After all, for Jesus and his disciples, hell was not Dante's descending fiery circles, but it was a literal place, the dump, a valley named hell where all the region's trash was collected and burned. They want to know, what awful thing must someone have done to be discarded, sent to the dump, treated like their life didn't matter. You see, they had recently watched the brutal, callous way their Roman occupiers had discarded some of their people. Some who dared to stand up to Rome weren't just executed, killed. Their blood was mingled with the animal sacrifices they were making to God. And the people want to know, was this a sacrifice to God? Is this God's doing, punishment for some heinous sin these people have committed? In response, Jesus tells them this beautiful parable about a man going through his vineyard, Marie Kondo style, except instead of focusing on joy, he focuses on production. He's assessing each tree in his vineyard. Is it producing fruit? If not, discard it. Now, parables always leave us to guess at who the characters are. And often we assign the master or the landowner role to God. But maybe we shouldn't be so quick. The landowners in Jesus' day were the powerful elite, many of whom had been conscripted by Rome to serve as their middlemen and ruling the Jewish people, and who often followed Rome's orders to treat anyone as disposable who was not producing for Rome. Jesus, highly critical of these corrupt landowners, lived in a very different way, valuing people regardless of their ability to produce. The disabled, the elderly, the widows, the children, the orphans, the foreigners, the mentally unstable, the list goes on and on and on. So maybe we would do better to picture God as the gardener, as the one who steps in and says, no, don't throw that one out. Let me love on them a little bit. I imagine God as the gardener, coming to water that fig tree each day and whispering to the tree, don't worry, beloved. It's not you I'm working on. It's that vineyard owner's heart. It's going to take some time before he learns to love you, to take joy in you, to value you the way I do. Now, Jesus' gardener, he would fail the Marie Kondo test. She might even call the gardener a hoarder. But maybe that's because God never treats living beings like things. like clutter to be simplified or given up on. Unlike the world's value hierarchy, God's joy in us is not based on how much we produce. It's not. What if we too could embrace those who are treated as disposable? Say to them, you know what? God finds joy in you, and so do I. What if by our example, by our testimony, by our witness, we could challenge our vineyard owners in Tallahassee, at our county commission, our city council, our school board, to value the poor, the sick, the homeless, the elderly, the disabled, the mentally ill, the school children, the immigrant, the incarcerated, or even the sea turtle, the way God does. Some of us will be gathering at Tropicana Field on April 8th to do just that. What if you left here today and you decided, you know what, I'm going to invest in someone or some living thing that will never be able to repay me, who has nothing to offer in return? The world will no doubt call that wasteful, to give so much of yourself to someone who may never produce anything of value to the world. But here's the secret that God knows, because God does this all the time. The secret to finding fruit on the tree has less to do with the watering and the tending and more to do with learning to see the fruit it is already producing. But you start watering it and you start tending it, and you'll learn to see that fruit, the value of that tree. And others will start noticing what you're doing, and they too will start to see that fruit, the value of that tree. And before you know it, you will all be finding joy in that fruit, in that tree. Some people say that Lent is a time to simplify, to declutter your life, your schedule, your diet. But what if this year we turn Lent into a time to waste our lives, at least by the world's standard, and start hoarding all those people and living things that the world has decided it doesn't value because they're not producing? What if we waste ourselves so that we might find ourselves and find the joy of God? You are not disposable to God. Loving you is not a waste to God. You bring God more joy than you could ever imagine. Thanks be to God. Amen.